Rain lashed against the neon-lit windows of a 24-hour diner in the quiet hours of the night. A quiet man was simply trying to eat his cherry pie in peace when a badge-heavy, arrogant cop decided he didn't like the color of the man's skin. What started as an unwarranted shakedown quickly spiraled into a career-ending nightmare for the officer, because the man sitting in the booth wasn't a random suspect. He was the newly appointed head of internal affairs, and he had been looking for a reason to clean house. Harlan Voss stared down at his black coffee resting on the scratched Formica table, watching the dark liquid vibrate faintly every time a heavy truck rumbled past the diner on the wet asphalt outside. He was 58 years old, his hair closely cropped and graying at the temples, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that felt entirely out of place in the grease-laden air of the Starlight Diner. He had spent a long, grueling shift in a windowless basement office at police headquarters, surrounded by towering stacks of manila folders, unredacted complaint forms, and use-of-force reports that read more like poorly written crime fiction than official police documents. He was tired. The kind of bone-deep fatigue that came not just from lack of sleep, but from the soul-crushing reality of his profession. As the newly imported head of internal affairs, brought in specifically from Chicago by a desperate mayor looking to overhaul a deeply problematic and culturally toxic police department, Harlan had spent his initial time in town acting as a ghost. He hadn't held a press conference. He hadn't walked the precinct floors to shake hands. He wanted to read the paper trail first. He wanted to know exactly who he was dealing with before they had a chance to put on their best behavior. And the paper trail was horrific. Taking a slow sip of his bitter coffee, Harlan adjusted his silver-rimmed reading glasses. The diner was mostly empty, occupied only by a long-haul trucker snoring softly in a corner booth, a pair of exhausted nurses coming off a late shift, and Sarah, the young waitress, wiping down the counter with a bleach-soaked rag. It was peaceful, a brief respite from the endless ugliness of badge-wielding corruption. Then the chime above the heavy glass door jingled, violently shattering the quiet atmosphere. 2 uniformed police officers walked in, bringing a gust of cold, damp wind with them. The lead officer, a thick-necked, broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, walked with an exaggerated swagger, his heavy utility belt clinking against the doorframe. His uniform was tight across his chest, the fabric strained over muscles built in a gym rather than through practical endurance. His name tag caught the harsh fluorescent light. Keller. Harlan didn't move his head, but his eyes tracked the officer through the reflection in the dark window beside him. Officer Vance Keller, badge number 8442. Harlan knew that name. He knew it intimately. In recent days, Harlan had read no less than 17 formal complaints filed against Keller by citizens of this exact neighborhood. The complaints ranged from unlawful detainment and verbal harassment to outright brutality, mostly directed at minorities. Every single one of them had been swept under the rug by a compliant union representative and a precinct captain who prioritized arrest quotas over constitutional rights. Keller was precisely the kind of cancer Harlan had been hired to cut out of the department. Trailing slightly behind Keller was a much younger officer, Officer Finn Reed, fresh out of the academy. His uniform was practically uncreased, his face pale and nervous. Reed looked like a teenager playing dress-up, his eyes darting around the diner with uncomfortable apprehension. He was assigned to Keller for field training, a disastrous pairing that Harlan had already noted in his mental ledger. Putting an impressionable rookie with a predator was how systemic corruption multiplied. "Coffee, Sarah, and make it fresh. I'm not drinking that tar from the bottom of the pot," Keller barked, not bothering with a greeting. He leaned heavily against the counter, his hand resting casually on the butt of his service weapon, an intimidation tactic so ingrained in his posture he probably didn't even realize he was doing it. Sarah flinched slightly, but kept her customer service smile intact. "Right away, Vance. Rough night out there?" "Same garbage, different dumpster," Keller scoffed, wiping the rain from his buzzed scalp. "Just sweeping up the trash." Harlan maintained his composure, slicing a piece of cherry pie with the side of his fork. He kept his breathing steady, entirely focused on his own space, projecting an aura of quiet invisibility. But invisibility is a privilege rarely afforded to a black man in a high-end suit sitting alone in the late hours. Keller turned his head, scanning the room out of sheer habit. His eyes swept past the sleeping trucker, skipped over the nurses, and locked onto Harlan. Harlan could feel the shift in the room's energy instantly. It was a visceral change in the air pressure, the unmistakable tension that arrives the moment a predator spots something it perceives as out of place. "Hey, Finn," Keller muttered, his voice dropping an octave, though it still carried across the quiet diner. "Look at this." Reed stepped up beside his training officer, blinking tiredly. "Look at what, Vance?" "Booth 4, Keller said, his chin jerking subtly in Harlan's direction. "Look at the suit. Look at the watch. You see the car parked out front? The black town car." "Yeah," Reed said hesitantly. "Nice car." "Too nice for this side of the tracks," Keller sneered, a cruel smile playing at the corner of his lips. "You know who wears a $3,000 suit and drives a car like that in the late hours in this district? Someone pushing weight. Someone who doesn't belong here." "Vance, come on," Reed whispered, his voice tinged with sudden panic. "He's just eating pie. He's not doing anything. Let's just get our coffee and get back on patrol. Command said they want us doing high-visibility loops near the industrial park." "Command isn't out here in the trenches, rookie," Keller replied, his eyes narrowing as he stepped away from the counter. He adjusted his duty belt, lifting it slightly over his hips, a physical preparation for conflict. "This is how you do proactive policing. You see something that doesn't fit the picture, you shake it until the loose change falls out. Watch and learn." Harlan took another sip of his coffee. The hot liquid did little to warm the sudden, icy resolve settling in his chest. He had hoped for a quiet night. He had wanted nothing more than a few minutes of peace before returning to the mountain of paperwork that detailed Vance Keller's abuses of power. But sometimes the paperwork walks right up to your table. The heavy thud of Keller's tactical boots echoed against the checkered linoleum floor. Each step was deliberate and measured to maximize his physical presence. He didn't just walk over to Harlan's booth. He invaded the space, coming to a halt just inches from the edge of the table. He stood far too close, deliberately looming over Harlan to force the seated man to crane his neck upward. It was textbook psychological intimidation, page 1 of the bully's handbook. Harlan did not look up immediately. He meticulously folded his paper napkin, placed it next to his saucer, and finally raised his eyes. His expression was a masterclass in emotional control, blank, polite, and completely unbothered. "Can I help you, officer?" Harlan asked, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that betrayed no fear whatsoever. Keller placed his large hands on his hips, pushing his unbuttoned rain jacket back to clearly display his handcuffs, taser, and firearm. "Just doing a little neighborhood check. Don't see you around here much, pal." "I just moved to the city," Harlan replied calmly. "Is it a requirement to be a long-term resident to enjoy a slice of pie at the Starlight?" Keller's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to eye contact. He was used to people looking away, stammering, or showing immediate deference to the uniform. Harlan's unwavering calm gaze felt to Keller like a challenge, a direct insult to his authority. "You've got a smart mouth on you," Keller noted, his tone shifting from falsely casual to overtly hostile. "I asked you a simple question. This is a high-crime area. We've got a lot of narcotics moving through these streets late at night. Guys driving fancy cars, wearing fancy clothes, sitting around, waiting to make a drop. Harlan let a beat of silence pass. He looked at Officer Reed, who was standing a few feet behind Keller, looking like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. Harlan then shifted his gaze back to Keller. "Officer, I assure you my only intention tonight is to finish my dessert," Harlan said, his tone perfectly level. "I am not engaged in the sale of narcotics. I am not waiting to make a drop. I am simply a patron of this establishment." "Yeah? Well, I decide who looks suspicious and who doesn't," Keller snapped, leaning over the table, bringing his face closer to Harlan's. The smell of stale cigarette smoke and peppermint gum wafted off him. "And you look like a walking red flag. Let's see some ID." Across the diner, Sarah, the waitress, stopped wiping the counter. "Vance," she called out, her voice tight with anxiety. "Leave him alone. He's been perfectly quiet. He tipped me $5 just for pouring his coffee." "Stay out of this, Sarah. This is official police business," Keller barked without turning his head, his eyes locked on Harlan. "I said, let's see some ID." Harlan leaned back against the red vinyl booth, creating a small degree of physical distance. He laced his fingers together and rested them on his lap. "Officer, under the Fourth Amendment, you are required to have reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime before you can demand my identification. Sitting in a diner eating pie does not meet that legal standard. Therefore, I respectfully decline your request." The diner went dead silent. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerated pie case near the register. Reed's eyes widened to the size of saucers. Even the trucker in the corner seemed to have stopped snoring. Keller stared at Harlan, his face slowly turning a mottled shade of red. The veins in his thick neck began to bulge against the collar of his uniform. He was a man who operated entirely on unchecked ego, protected by a system that rarely asked him to explain his actions. To be educated on constitutional law by a black man in public was a humiliation his fragile psyche could not process. "You want to play lawyer with me?" Keller hissed, a dangerous edge creeping into his voice. "You think you're smart? Let me tell you how this works, counselor. You're in my sector. That means you do what I say when I say it. If I tell you to jump, you ask how high. If I ask for your ID, you hand it over, or I'm dragging you out of this booth and locking you up for obstruction of justice and resisting arrest. You cannot charge someone with resisting arrest if the initial detainment is unlawful," Harlan countered smoothly, his heart rate barely elevating. He was cataloging every word, every threat. Violation of department policy regarding courtesy and professionalism, violation of Terry versus Ohio parameters, threat of false arrest under the color of law. "Vance, let's just go," Reed pleaded, stepping forward and touching his training officer's arm lightly. "He knows his rights. We don't have probable cause. The sergeant is going to chew us out if we drag someone in on a BS charge again." Keller violently shrugged off Reed's hand, turning on the rookie with a furious glare. "Shut your mouth, Reed. Go wait in the cruiser." "But—" "I said get your ass in the cruiser," Keller roared. Reed flinched, looking at Harlan with a deeply apologetic, terrified expression before turning and hurrying out the front door. The bell jingled sadly in his wake. Keller turned back to Harlan, fully unhinged now, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just dismissed the only witness who might have tried to protect his career. "Now," Keller growled, unhooking the leather strap over his baton. "It's just you and me, and I'm going to ask you one last time before things get extremely uncomfortable for you. Give me your damn ID, or stand up and put your hands behind your back." Harlan looked at the man. He saw right through the bluster to the profound weakness beneath it. This was a man who used a badge to compensate for a pathetic, hollow life. Harlan had put away dozens of cops exactly like Keller. during his tenure in Chicago. They always thought they were untouchable, right up until the moment the cell door slammed shut. "Officer Keller," Harlan said softly, using the man's name for the first time. "I strongly advise you to take a step back, take a deep breath, and walk out of this diner. If you choose to escalate this situation further, I promise you, your life will change in ways you are not prepared for." For a fraction of a second, Harlan's calm use of Keller's name caused the officer to pause. A flicker of confusion passed over his aggressive features. How did this random civilian know his name? He glanced down at his chest, realizing his name tag was clearly visible. The confusion instantly morphed back into rage, fueled by the embarrassment of his brief hesitation. "Are you threatening a police officer?" Keller demanded, his hand moving away from his baton and dropping to the grip of his Glock 19. He didn't unholster it, but the implication was deafeningly clear. "Did you all hear that?" he yelled to the empty room, looking toward Sarah and the trucker, who was now wide awake and staring in horror. "He just threatened my life. I did no such thing. And there are witnesses here who will attest to that, as well as the security camera directly above the register," Harlan noted dryly, not breaking eye contact. "I am giving you professional advice. You are operating outside the bounds of your authority. You are letting your personal prejudices dictate your policing. It is sloppy. It is illegal. And it is about to end." "Get up!" Keller screamed suddenly, lunging forward. He grabbed Harlan by the lapel of his expensive suit, his thick knuckles bunching the fine wool, and attempted to violently yank the older man out of the booth. Harlan did not panic. He did not throw a punch. He allowed himself to be pulled forward slightly, shifting his center of gravity to remain grounded, and used his right hand to grip Keller's wrist with an iron-like strength that shocked the younger officer. Harlan had spent years doing tactical street work before putting on a suit. His grip was like a steel vise. "Let go of my jacket," Harlan said, his voice dropping to a terrifying absolute zero. The polite civilian demeanor evaporated instantly, replaced by the hardened commanding authority of a senior law enforcement official who had stared down cartel bosses and corrupt precinct captains alike. Keller froze. The sheer force of command in Harlan's voice was something he had only ever heard from high-ranking brass. His brain short-circuited. He held onto the jacket for another second before Harlan's grip tightened on his wrist, painfully digging into a nerve. Keller gasped softly and released the fabric, stepping back involuntarily. "You just assaulted me," Keller stammered, trying to regain the upper hand, trying to find his anger again. "That's assaulting an officer. You're done. You're going to prison." Harlan slowly smoothed out the wrinkles in his suit jacket. He looked at Keller, not with fear, but with profound disappointment and clinical detachment. "Officer Vance Keller," Harlan said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent diner. "In the span of just a few minutes, you have violated department policies regarding racial profiling, unlawful detainment, verbal abuse of a citizen, and attempted unlawful arrest. Furthermore, by laying hands on me without legal justification, you have committed simple battery under the state penal code." "Shut up," Keller yelled, his hand trembling as he gripped his radio mic, preparing to call in. "At this hour, an officer in need of immediate assistance. I'm calling this in. You're going down." "You wanted my identification, Officer Keller?" Harlan asked, entirely ignoring the threat. "You demanded my papers." "Keep your hands where I can see them," Keller shouted, stepping back and drawing his taser, pointing the red laser dot squarely at Harlan's chest. "I am reaching into my inside left breast pocket to retrieve my wallet," Harlan announced loudly, ensuring Sarah and the trucker heard him clearly. "I am moving slowly. I am not a threat." With agonizing slowness, keeping his right hand flat on the table, Harlan reached his left hand inside his tailored jacket. Keller's finger hovered over the trigger of the taser, his breathing heavy and ragged, sweat beading on his forehead. He was desperate for an excuse to pull the trigger, desperate to assert his dominance over the man who had completely stripped him of his power, using nothing but words. Harlan pulled out a slim, black leather credential case. He didn't toss it on the table. He didn't hand it over. He held it up in the air between them, his thumb catching the edge of the leather and letting it flip open. The harsh fluorescent light of the diner caught the brilliant gleam of a gold shield. It wasn't a standard police badge. It was larger, intricately detailed, with an eagle perched atop the seal of the city. Below the badge was a laminated high-security identification card bearing Harlan's face. Keller stared at it, his brain clouded by rage and adrenaline, taking a moment to process the bold black lettering printed across the top of the ID card. Bamamaman, Harlan Voss, Chief Investigator, Head of Internal Affairs, Division Office of the Chief of Police. The blood drained from Keller's face so rapidly he looked like he might pass out. The red laser dot of his taser trembled violently on Harlan's chest before dipping toward the floor as Keller's arm lost all its strength. His jaw went slack, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish pulled onto a dock. "Read it aloud, Officer Keller," Harlan commanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "You wanted to see my papers. Read them." You're... Keller stuttered, his voice cracking. "I am Chief Voss," Harlan said, slowly lowering the badge, but keeping his eyes locked on the terrified cop. "I was appointed by the mayor recently to clean up the garbage in this department. I have spent recent days reading your file, Vance, your excessive force complaints, your numerous civil rights violations. I came here tonight to get a cup of coffee and clear my head. I had intended to call you into my office to begin your termination process." Harlan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, bringing his face closer to Keller. "But you couldn't even give me the weekend, could you? You couldn't resist the urge to be a thug for one more night." "Chief, I didn't know," Keller whispered. His arrogance entirely evaporated, replaced by the sniveling cowardice of a bully who had just realized he picked a fight with a heavyweight champion. "I was just doing a proactive check. You thought you saw a black man in a nice suit and assumed he was a criminal." Harlan cut him off, his voice slicing through the air like a scalpel. "You thought you had a free pass to harass, intimidate, and assault a citizen because you wear that uniform. You are a disgrace to the badge, Keller. You are the reason people fear the police instead of trusting them." Harlan picked up his cell phone from the table and dialed a number. He put it on speaker, setting it down next to his cold coffee. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Captain Beck, Robert, this is Harlan Voss," Harlan said, his eyes never leaving Keller's terrified face. "Chief Voss," the precinct captain replied, his voice shifting instantly to a tone of deep respect. "What can I do for you?" "I need you to send a patrol supervisor to the Starlight Diner on 4th and Elm immediately," Harlan stated clearly. "I have a situation with one of your men." "Is everyone okay?" "Who is it?" Beck asked, concern radiating through the phone. "Officer Vance Keller," Harlan said. "He is currently standing in front of me. I need a supervisor here to confiscate his weapon, his badge, and his police vehicle. Officer Keller is hereby suspended without pay, effective immediately pending formal criminal charges for battery and civil rights violations under the color of law." Keller let out a pathetic whimpering sound, taking a step back as if physically struck. "Understood, Chief," Beck said without a second of hesitation. "I'll be there myself shortly." Harlan hung up the phone. He looked at the trembling man standing before him. "Holster your taser, Vance. Step back and stand in the corner until the captain arrives," Harlan ordered. "If you say one single word between now and then, I will personally ensure the district attorney adds a charge of attempting to intimidate an internal affairs investigator. Do you understand me?" Keller swallowed hard, tears of pure panic welling in his eyes. He fumbled with his taser, nearly dropping it before shoving it back into the holster. "Yes, sir," he whispered. "Go," Harlan commanded. Keller turned and shuffled to the corner of the diner near the restrooms, standing exactly where he was told, looking like a chastised schoolboy. Harlan let out a long, slow breath. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving behind a sharp, profound clarity. He picked up his fork, looked at the half-eaten cherry pie, and took another bite. It was still good. Captain Robert Beck pushed through the glass doors, bringing the storm in with him. Beck was a 30-year veteran of the force, his face heavily lined, his shoulders stooped under the weight of a precinct that was slowly tearing itself apart. He took one look at the scene. Harlan sitting calmly in booth 4 with his gold shield resting on the table, and Keller cowering near the restrooms, and let out a heavy, defeated sigh. "Chief Voss," Beck said, removing his soaked uniform cap. He didn't offer a handshake. The situation was far too volatile for pleasantries. "I got here as fast as I could." "Captain," Harlan nodded, taking a final sip of his cold coffee. "Thank you for your prompt response." Beck turned his gaze to Keller. The captain's eyes hardened, transforming from tired administrator to commanding officer. "Vance, front and center." Keller shuffled forward, his eyes darting frantically toward the door as if hoping for a miracle rescue. "Cap, listen. This is a massive misunderstanding. I was conducting a standard Terry stop based on suspicious behavior." "Save it for your official statement, Vance," Beck snapped, cutting him off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Chief Voss gave me the summary over the phone. Turn around. Hands on the counter." "Cap, come on," Keller pleaded, his voice cracking. "You know me. I'm one of the top producing officers in the district. You're going to take the word of some suit from Chicago over your own guy?" Harlan watched the exchange carefully. This was a crucial test for Beck. The cultural rot in a police department always started at the supervisory level. If Beck hesitated, Harlan would know he had to clean out the captain's office too. Beck didn't hesitate. "I said, turn around and put your hands on the counter," Beck roared, his voice echoing off the diner's aluminum fixtures. "Do not make me give you a lawful order a third time." Keller whimpered, slowly turning and placing his hands on the Formica counter next to a stack of menus. Beck stepped up behind him, expertly unhooking Keller's duty belt. The heavy thud of the belt containing the Glock 19, the taser, and the baton hitting the diner floor sounded like the closing of a coffin lid on Keller's career. Beck then reached up and unpinned the silver badge from Keller's chest. Before Beck could read Keller his rights, the diner door burst open again. A red-faced, breathless man in a rumpled trench coat stormed into the room. He didn't wear a uniform, but the arrogance rolling off him was identical to the energy Keller had brought in earlier. This was Victor Lang, the senior district representative for the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association, the police union. Reed must have called him from the cruiser. "Nobody says another damn word!" Lang bellowed, pointing a thick accusatory finger at Beck. "Robert, back away from my member right now. Vance, you invoke your Weingarten rights immediately. You do not speak to anyone without union counsel present." Beck stepped back, his jaw clenching. He looked at Harlan, deferring to the internal affairs chief. Harlan remained seated. He picked up a napkin and wiped his mouth, his demeanor entirely unruffled by the sudden intrusion. "Mr. Lang, I presume," Harlan said calmly. Lang marched over to Harlan's booth, slamming his palms down on the table, attempting the exact same physical intimidation tactic Keller had tried earlier. "You must be Voss, the mayor's new attack dog. Listen to me very closely, Chief. You are way out of your jurisdiction here. You don't come into my city, ambush my officers on their meal break, and strip them of their police powers without a formal review board. Actually, Mr. Lang, according to department directive, an officer can be immediately stripped of his police powers by a commanding officer of the rank of captain or higher if they present an immediate threat to the public or the integrity of the department," Harlan recited flawlessly, finally standing up. When Harlan stood, he was 3 inches taller than the union rep. He buttoned his suit jacket, projecting absolute, unshakable dominance. "Furthermore," Harlan continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous register, "Officer Keller was not ambushed. He initiated an unconstitutional stop, attempted an unlawful detainment, and committed simple battery. It is all recorded on the diner's security cameras." Harlan gestured toward the dome camera above the register. Lang's eyes flicked upward, and a flash of realization and panic crossed his face. "You think you've got a grand slam here, Voss," Lang sneered, recovering quickly, lowering his voice so only Harlan could hear. "You don't know the politics of this town. You know who Vance Keller's uncle is? Richard Crow, the president of the entire state union. You fire this kid, Crow will grind this department to a halt. The blue flu will hit this city so hard you won't have enough cops on the street to write a parking ticket. You'll be begging to go back to Chicago by next week." Harlan smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was a predatory baring of teeth. "Mr. Lang, I thrive in the cold," Harlan whispered back. "If Richard Crow wants to organize an illegal strike to protect a racist, corrupt thug of a nephew, I welcome it. I will personally forward the injunction to the Department of Justice and invite the FBI to audit your union's pension fund. I'm sure they'd love to see where the dues are really going." Lang's face lost its color. He opened his mouth to retort, but found he had no ammunition left. Harlan had outflanked him on every conceivable level. "Captain Beck," Harlan said aloud, turning his back on the union rep, dismissing him entirely. "Place Mr. Keller in the back of your vehicle. Transport him to Central Booking. Charge him with Title 18, U.S.C., Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. Then send Officer Reed to my office first thing in the morning." "Understood, Chief," Beck nodded, grabbing Keller by the bicep. As Keller was marched out into the rain, crying softly, Harlan left a generous tip on the table for Sarah. The night was over, but the war for the soul of the department had just begun. In the days that followed, morning sunlight offered no warmth as it filtered through the blinds of Harlan's office on the 7th floor of police headquarters. The room was Spartan, decorated only with the towering stacks of complaint files that had become his entire world. At the appointed time, a timid knock rattled the frosted glass of his door. "Enter," Harlan commanded. Officer Finn Reed stepped into the room. The rookie looked like he hadn't slept in days. His uniform was immaculate, but his posture was completely defeated. He stood in front of Harlan's heavy mahogany desk, clutching his uniform hat in his hands, staring at the floor. He looked incredibly young, barely in his early 20s, a kid who had signed up to help people and had rapidly discovered the nightmare of institutional reality. "Have a seat, Officer Reed," Harlan said, gesturing to the heavy wooden chair opposite his desk. Reed sat down, rigidly perching on the edge of the seat. "Chief Voss, I want to resign. I brought my badge. I'll clear out my locker today." Harlan leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He studied the young man. This was the collateral damage of a corrupt culture. The good ones, or the ones who wanted to be good, were either corrupted, bullied into silence, or driven out entirely. "I am not accepting your resignation today, Finn," Harlan said quietly. Reed looked up, his eyes wide with confusion. "But I was there. I was his partner. The union rep, Victor, called me this morning. He said I'm going down with Vance. He said I'm an accessory to a civil rights violation because I didn't stop him. Victor Lang is attempting to intimidate you into silence so you don't testify against Keller," Harlan explained, his tone shifting from commanding officer to something resembling a stern but protective mentor. "He knows that as a probationary officer, you are terrified of losing your career before it begins. I am telling you right now that as long as you sit in that chair and tell me the absolute unvarnished truth, your badge is safe." Harlan reached across the desk and hit the record button on a small digital audio device. "This is an official internal affairs interview. You have been given your garrity warnings, meaning what you say here cannot be used against you in criminal proceedings provided you are truthful. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." Reed swallowed hard. "Finn, I read Keller's file," Harlan said, leaning forward. "He has a pattern of targeting specific individuals in the 4th District. Always late at night, always minorities, always driving nice vehicles or carrying expensive items. But here is what doesn't make sense to me. In all those complaints, an arrest was never made. No drugs were ever logged into evidence. So if he wasn't doing it to inflate his arrest stats, why was he doing it?" Reed looked down at his hands, his knuckles white as he gripped his hat. A tear leaked out of the corner of his eye, betraying the immense stress he was under. Because it wasn't about arrests, Chief," Reed whispered, his voice trembling. "It was about the tax." Harlan went perfectly still. "Explain the tax." Reed took a shuddering breath. "Vance, he runs a crew on the night shift. They call themselves the Night Kings. When they spot someone who looks out of place, someone they think has money but won't go to the cops, like a local business owner or someone passing through the wrong neighborhood, they pull them over. They threaten to plant narcotics on them or impound their car or drag them in on resisting charges." Harlan felt a cold fury building in his chest. "Unless the victim pays them off," Reed continued. "Yes, sir. Vance calls it street tax. They take cash, watches, jewelry, whatever they can get. The victims are too scared to report it because it's their word against a cop's. The few that do complain, Vance's uncle, Richard Crow, make sure the union lawyers bury the paperwork before it ever reaches a desk like yours." Harlan looked at the digital recorder, then back at the rookie. The scope of the cancer was much larger than he had anticipated. It wasn't just Vance Keller acting as a lone racist bully. It was an organized criminal enterprise operating under the protection of a badge, sanctioned and covered up by the highest levels of the police union. The scope: extortion, armed robbery, conspiracy, racketeering. The players: Keller, an unknown number of Night Kings, and the state union president. The evidence: Reed's testimony, the diner security footage, and whatever financial paper trail Harlan could dig up from the union's legal defense fund. "How many officers are in this crew, Finn?" Harlan asked, his voice dead calm, the voice of a man preparing for a long, bloody war. "6, sir," Reed replied. "Vance is the ringleader, but the others, they're just as bad. I tried to transfer out. I tried to tell my sergeant, but he just told me to keep my head down and learn how the real world works." "The real world is about to catch up with all of them," Harlan said, reaching over to turn off the recorder. He stood up, walking around his desk to stand beside the young officer. He placed a firm, reassuring hand on Reed's trembling shoulder. "You did the right thing today, Finn. It takes more courage to sit in that chair and report your own training officer than it does to kick down a door." Harlan walked back to his desk, picking up his phone. "Now, I am putting you on paid administrative leave, and I am moving you into a secure hotel out of the county, because by this evening, I am going to tear this precinct apart." Reed looked up, a mixture of profound relief and lingering terror in his eyes. Harlan dialed a secure line, his gaze fixed on the skyline of the city visible through his window, a city that was about to experience a seismic shift. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, Field Office," a crisp voice answered on the other end. "This is Chief Harlan Voss, Internal Affairs," Harlan said smoothly. "Get me the special agent in charge of the Public Corruption Squad. I need to report a RICO violation." "Gentlemen," Harlan began, his voice commanding the room with effortless authority. He tapped the whiteboard with a dry erase marker, circling a web of interconnected photographs. At the center of the web, was Officer Vance Keller. Directly above him, connected by a thick red line, was Richard Crowe, president of the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association. For the last several years, a faction of the 4th District Night Shift, known colloquially as the Night Kings, has operated not as law enforcement, but as a state-sponsored extortion ring. Agent Harrington stepped forward, crossing his arms. Under Title 18, United States Code Section 1961, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, we are classifying this police union local as a corrupt enterprise. They have engaged in armed robbery, evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and wire fraud. Harlan looked across the room of federal agents. At shift change, the remaining members of the Night Kings will be in the precinct locker room suiting up for their shift. You will enter through the rear sally port. Captain Beck has agreed to leave the security doors propped and the cameras in the hallway offline for exactly 2 minutes. You will take them down quickly and quietly. No local broadcast, no radios. What about the union boss? One of the tactical team leaders asked. Crowe operates out of a fortified office building across town. His security detail is entirely off-duty cops. Leave Mr. Crowe to me, Harlan said, a dangerously cold smile touching the corners of his mouth. I have a specific delivery for him. At shift change, a convoy of unmarked black Suburbans rolled quietly into the rear alley of the 4th District Precinct. Inside the locker room, the officers of the Night Kings were laughing, passing around a flask of cheap whiskey, and dividing up the cash they had skimmed from a raid nights prior. They felt invincible. They owned the streets, the darkness, and the fear of the people they swore to protect. The steel doors to the locker room didn't just open. They were violently breached by a battering ram. Before a single corrupt officer could reach for a service weapon, federal agents flooded the narrow aisles between the metal lockers, assault rifles raised, laser sights painting the chests of the stunned cops. FBI, nobody move! Keep your hands away from your belts! Harrington roared, the sound deafening in the confined space. The swagger vanished instantly. The flask shattered on the concrete floor. One officer, a heavyset man named Miller, reflexively dropped his hand toward his holster. Do it, Miller! Give me a reason! Harrington barked, closing the distance and pressing the muzzle of his rifle directly into the man's chest. Miller's knees buckled, and he raised his hands high in the air, his face completely drained of color. Within moments, the corrupt officers were face down on the cold floor, their wrists bound in heavy-duty zip ties, their badges stripped from their chests. Simultaneously, a short distance away, Harlan Voss stepped out of his black town car. The Union headquarters was an imposing brick fortress, a physical manifestation of the political power Richard Crowe wielded. Harlan did not bring a tactical team. He brought only 2 quiet, sharp-suited federal agents carrying thick briefcases. Harlan pushed through the glass double doors, ignoring the protests of the receptionist, and walked directly toward the private elevator. The 2 off-duty cops acting as security moved to intercept him, placing their hands on their holstered weapons. Harlan didn't even break his stride. He held up a sealed federal warrant, his eyes locking onto the larger of the 2 guards. Interfere with a federal search warrant in a RICO investigation, and you will share a cell in Leavenworth with the man upstairs. Step aside. The absolute certainty in Harlan's voice, combined with the presence of the federal agents, paralyzed the guards. They stepped back, lowering their eyes. Bullies only understand power, and they had just realized they were profoundly outmatched. The elevator chimed on the top floor. Harlan stepped out onto the plush carpet and pushed open the heavy oak doors of Richard Crowe's office without knocking. Crowe, a large, florid-faced man with slicked-back hair, was frantically shoving thick stacks of ledgers into an industrial paper shredder. Victor Lang, the union rep from the diner, was frantically typing on a laptop, sweat pouring down his face. "What the hell is this?" Crow bellowed, abandoning the shredder. "You can't just barge in here, Voss. I'll have your badge. I'll have the mayor's badge." "Mr. Crow," Harlan said smoothly, stepping into the center of the room. "You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it. Every word you say from this point forward is being recorded by federal agents." Lang slammed the laptop shut. "You've got nothing, Voss. You think arresting my nephew means anything? Keller is a rogue actor." The union had no idea what he was doing. And as for the Union Defense Fund, the accounts are empty. The money was legally transferred to an offshore legal defense trust this morning. You can't touch it." Crow smirked, regaining some of his arrogant composure. "You're a tourist in my city, Harlan. You think a few scared rookies and a hothead cop are enough to bring me down? I'm politically insulated. I've owned the city council for a decade. By tomorrow morning, a judge will toss your warrants, and you'll be on a plane back to Chicago." Harlan let a moment of silence fill the room. He walked over to the shredder, glancing at the ribbons of destroyed paper, then turned back to the union boss. "You are correct about one thing, Richard," Harlan conceded, adjusting his cuffs. "Vance Keller is a hothead. He is a racist, a bully, and a coward. But cowards are inherently self-preserving. Did you really think he trusted you?" Crow's smirk faltered. "What are you talking about? When Captain Beck arrested your nephew, Keller was terrified," Harlan explained, pulling a small silver flash drive from his jacket pocket and setting it gently on Crow's mahogany desk. "But he wasn't just terrified of me. He was terrified that you would cut him loose to save yourself. So when the FBI offered him a plea deal to reduce his sentence, he didn't just confess." Harlan leaned over the desk, his eyes boring into Crow's soul. "Keller gave us his insurance policy, a burner phone he kept hidden in the air vent of his cruiser. It contains years of recorded phone calls between the two of you. Calls where you explicitly instruct him on which businesses to shake down. Calls where you discuss exactly how to launder the street tax through the union pension fund. Calls where you order the physical assault of a witness who tried to testify against the Night Kings." Lang staggered backward, hitting the wall. He looked at Crow with sheer terror. "Richie, you said there were no recordings. You said you never used open lines." "Shut up, Tommy!" Crow screamed, his face turning a deep, dangerous purple. He lunged toward the desk, desperately reaching for the flash drive. Before his fingers could brush the metal, one of the federal agents seized his arm, spinning the massive man around and slamming him face first into the polished wood of his own desk. The metallic ratcheting of handcuffs echoed sharply in the luxurious office. "Richard Crow, you are under arrest for racketeering, extortion, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud," the federal agent recited calmly. Harlan picked the flash drive back up, slipping it into his pocket. He looked down at the disgraced union boss, whose cheek was pressed painfully against the desk, his empire crumbling into dust around him. "The house always wins, Richard," Harlan whispered. "And I am of the house." In the months that followed, the heavy wooden doors of Federal Courtroom 4B swung open. The press flashes were blinding. Dozens of reporters shouted over one another, microphones thrust into the air, desperate for a quote. The trial of the decade had just concluded. Harlan Voss stepped out into the crisp autumn air, wearing a pristine navy blue suit, his silver shield clipped proudly to his belt. He did not smile for the cameras, but there was a profound sense of peace in his eyes. The federal judge had not been lenient. Vance Keller had pleaded guilty and received a mandatory minimum of 15 years in the Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. His fellow Night Kings received sentences ranging from 10 to 12 years, but the real victory was Richard Crow. Stripped of his political protection and abandoned by his terrified cronies, the former union boss had been convicted on all counts of the RICO indictment. He was sentenced to 25 years. The corrupt union local was dismantled entirely, placed in federal receivership, and its leadership purged. Harlan walked past the reporters, offering a polite but firm no comment, and climbed into the back of his waiting town car. "Where to, Chief?" the driver asked. "The Starlight Diner, please," Harlan replied, leaning back against the leather seat and watching the city roll by. It felt different now. The dark cloud that had suffocated the 4th District had lifted. Crime rates hadn't magically disappeared. It was still a city, after all. But the dynamic between the citizens and the uniform had shifted. The predatory tension was gone. Trust, though fragile, was slowly beginning to take root in the soil Harlan had ruthlessly scorched and cleared. The bell above the glass door of the Starlight Diner chimed musically as Harlan walked in. It was a bright, sunny afternoon. The diner was bustling with a late lunch crowd. Sarah, the waitress, spotted him immediately, her face lighting up in a genuine, bright smile. "Chief Voss, good to see you." "Hello, Sarah." Harlan smiled warmly, taking a seat at booth 4, his booth. "How have things been?" "Quiet," she laughed, pouring him a fresh cup of coffee. "The good kind of quiet. We actually have people coming in late at night again without looking over their shoulders." "I'm glad to hear that. I'll take a slice of the cherry pie, please." As Sarah walked away, the diner door chimed again. 2 police officers walked in. Harlan watched them in the reflection of the window. The first was Officer Finn Reed. He looked completely different from the terrified rookie from months earlier. His posture was straight, his eyes alert but calm. He wore the uniform with a quiet pride, completely devoid of the toxic swagger that had poisoned his former training officer. Beside him was his new partner, a seasoned, highly respected veteran who had been brought in to properly mentor the young cops in the precinct. Reed spotted Harlan in the booth. He paused, removing his uniform cap, and gave a crisp, deeply respectful nod. Harlan picked up his coffee cup, returning the nod with a subtle acknowledging tilt of his head. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The message was clear. "We have the watch, Chief, and we're doing it right this time." Harlan turned back to his window, watching the city move under the bright afternoon sun. He took a bite of the cherry pie. It tasted like victory. He knew his job in this city was far from over. Internal affairs was a never-ending battle against the darkest parts of human nature that sought out power. There would always be another Keller. There would always be another Crow trying to rig the system. But not today. Today, the predators were locked in cages. The innocent were safe. And a good man could sit in a diner and eat his pie in absolute, undisturbed peace. Corruption thrives in the dark, but true justice never flinches when the lights come on. If Harlan Voss's brilliant, icy takedown of a corrupt empire gave you chills, you won't want to miss our next story. Hit that like button to show your support for the good guys. Share this incredible story of justice with your friends and family, and make sure to subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on so you never miss another thrilling real-life drama. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were in the Chief's shoes? Stay safe and stay tuned.